My name is Mila Hartwell. I'm 31, and until recently, I honestly thought I had my life figured out. I've never been the woman with wild ambitions or a taste for chaos. I'm a software developer. Steady hours, steady paycheck, steady brain that likes problems with clean solutions. I had a decent house in a quiet suburb, a routine that worked, and a marriage I believed was solid. Not perfect, not a movie, but strong. My husband Logan and I met 8 years ago. Looking back, it feels like a whole lifetime crammed into one threadbare photo album. I was 23, fresh out of college, working my first real job and pretending I wasn't terrified of being an adult. Logan was 22, working as an assistant at a marketing agency, still floating between career path and figure it out later. He was charming in that effortless way, like he didn't even realize people leaned in when he spoke. We met at a mutual friend's backyard barbecue. Cheap paper plates, burnt burgers, someone's speaker blasting a playlist that kept cutting out. I remember standing near the cooler, doing that awkward scan for an escape route, when Logan walked right up to me and said, "You look like you're calculating how to flee." It was said with a grin, not mean, just accurate. I laughed, surprised he'd clock me that fast, and somehow we ended up talking for the rest of the night. Logan was the kind of person who made ordinary things feel like an adventure, like the world had hidden doors if you knew where to push. From that point, things moved fast. We started dating, and it felt like he added color to my quiet life. Logan was spontaneous. Last-minute road trips, new restaurants he'd seen on some random blog, concerts on weeknights like sleep didn't matter. Meanwhile, I was the grounded one, the planner, the woman checking the budget, checking the weather, double-checking the gas tank before we hit the road. It worked, or at least it felt like it did. He brought excitement. I brought stability. Logan used to tell me he'd never had stability before, and he said it like he was grateful. 3 years into dating, we got married. Small wedding. Family, close friends, no ballroom, no fancy catering. Neither of us came from money, and honestly, I didn't care. I remember standing there in my dress thinking, this is it. This is the life I chose. This is the life that will hold. After the wedding, we bought a small, two-bedroom house in a quiet suburb. Not the fanciest place, but it had potential, like us. For a while, it was good. I'd go to work, come home, and Logan would usually be in the kitchen or on the couch, scrolling his phone, telling me stories about his day. Back then, he still worked in marketing, so there was always drama. Clients, coworkers, ridiculous deadlines. I'd listen. That was our dynamic. Logan was the talker, the storyteller, the spark. I was the listener, the anchor. We didn't have kids, and that was mutual. Logan wasn't in a rush. I wasn't either. We always said we'd wait until we were more financially secure, more ready for that next step. It felt like we were on the same page. Looking back, I wonder if I got too comfortable. Because routines are sneaky. They make you think you're safe just because you're consistent. I woke up, worked, came home, repeated. Date nights happened. Dinner at our usual spot, a movie, a quick laugh. And somewhere in all that steadiness, I stopped noticing the little things. Like how Logan thrived on attention. It wasn't a bad thing at first. He could light up a room and people naturally gravitated toward him. I think I started taking that for granted, assuming his warmth was just a permanent feature of our life. We argued sometimes, like any couple, small stuff. Me forgetting the trash, him leaving shoes everywhere. Nothing major, nothing that screamed danger. But relationships can look fine on the surface while cracks form quietly underneath. And if you don't pay attention, those cracks spread until the whole foundation is fragile. I didn't see it coming. Not then. 2 years ago, our lives got a new character. Jade. Jade moved in next door after the older couple beside us downsized and left for Florida. She was about 28, young for the neighborhood, a personal trainer, fit, confident, loud in the way confidence is loud even when a person barely speaks. From the second she arrived, Jade was hard not to notice. Not just because of her looks, though yes, she had that action movie glow, but because she was always outside doing something. Washing her car, mowing the lawn, setting up a pull-up bar in her yard. There was always a reason for her to be in view. Logan noticed her right away. How could he not? The first time we officially met Jade, she came over to introduce herself while we were in the yard one Saturday morning. She smiled like she'd known us for years. Logan struck up a conversation instantly, where she was from, what she did, how she liked the area. I remember standing there, smiling and nodding, barely getting a word in, while the two of them talked like old friends. At the time, I didn't think anything of it. Logan was outgoing. He talked to everyone. He'd be just as chatty with the mail carrier or the guy at the hardware store. It didn't occur to me that his interest in Jade had a different temperature. But looking back now, I can see the small shifts that started after that. It began with casual conversations. Whenever Jade was outside, Logan would find a reason to be outside too. At first, it was harmless, grabbing the mail, watering plants, taking out the trash. Somehow, those quick tasks turned into 10-minute chats, 15-minute chats, the kind of conversations that didn't end when I opened the back door. One afternoon, I came home from work and found them laughing in the driveway. Logan was holding a bag of recycling he'd meant to take out, and Jade was leaning casually against her car, sun hitting her hair like she'd planned it. When I walked up, they both turned to me like I was the one interrupting. "No big deal," Logan said, bright and easy. "Jade was just telling me about this new gym equipment she got." It didn't stop there. A couple weeks later, Logan baked cookies. Logan does not bake cookies. I didn't think much of it until I saw him walking across the yard with a plate in his hands. "Just being neighborly," he called back over his shoulder when I asked. I told myself it was sweet, that I was reading into nothing, that I should be grateful my husband was friendly. Then he bought new workout clothes, not just a t-shirt, actual fitted gear, the kind he'd never bothered with before. When I asked, he shrugged and said, "I'm thinking of getting in shape again." "Sure, fine." Except Jade jogged almost every morning. And wouldn't you know it, Logan's new routine started at the exact same time. One morning, I caught them chatting on the sidewalk as I was leaving for work. Logan was stretching, and Jade was showing him some technique to avoid shin splints, laughing like they shared a private joke. I gave a small wave, then drove off, but the image stayed in my chest like a cold coin. Around that time, I started noticing Logan's phone habits changing too. He'd always been on his phone, social media, texts, nonsense videos, but now he was guarded. A couple times I walked into the room and he'd lock his screen too fast, flip the phone face down like it burned. One night, I saw JD's name at the top of his screen. He swiped away so quickly I almost convinced myself I imagined it. When I asked, he brushed it off. "She sends workout stuff, tips. She's just helpful." I wanted to believe him. So I did. But the little things kept piling up like snow. Quiet, constant, until you look outside and realize the door might not open. Another time, I was in the garage and heard laughter from the backyard. I stepped out and saw them near the fence. Logan had a glass of iced tea in his hand like he belonged in Jade's space. Jade was gesturing animatedly, telling some story, and Logan was looking at her like she was the only person in the world. When Logan saw me, he waved like nothing was out of the ordinary. "Jade was just telling me this funny thing that happened with a client," he said later. It wasn't what he said. It was how he said it. There was a new energy in Logan's voice whenever Jade's name came up. He'd casually mention her. "Jade's thinking about getting a dog. Jade recommended this protein shake. Jade said this. Jade said that." And there were the glances. The kind you can't unsee once you start noticing them. I didn't confront him. Not then. Part of me didn't want to believe there was anything to worry about. We had history. We had a house. We had years built together like bricks. But another part of me, the part that could feel the pattern tightening, started paying closer attention. If something was happening, I needed to see it for myself. And then came the Saturday morning that started so normal, it almost feels cruel. I woke up early like I always do, made coffee, sat at the kitchen table scrolling the news on my phone while the house hummed softly around me. Logan was still in bed. Not unusual. He liked lazy mornings. For a moment, I actually felt relaxed. Funny how that works. You think everything is fine because you have no idea what's coming. About an hour later, Logan came into the kitchen in pajamas, hair messy, phone in one hand. He sat across from me, tapping his fingers on the table, glancing at his screen like it was a lifeline. I knew something was up the second he wouldn't meet my eyes. "You okay?" I asked, setting my phone down. He nodded too fast, then shook his head. "Actually, no." My stomach tightened. Anyone in a relationship knows those words rarely lead somewhere good. "We need to talk," he said. The kitchen felt colder. I leaned back in my chair. "All right, what's going on?" Logan hesitated, eyes darting around like he was searching for a softer landing. Finally, he looked at me and said, "I don't know how to say this, so I'm just going to say it. I think I have feelings for Jade." For a second, I genuinely thought I misheard him. "What?" I said, leaning forward like distance was the problem. He swallowed. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just happened. I've been spending time with her, and I feel this connection, and now I'm confused. Confused. That word hit harder than the confession itself. Not guilty, not sorry, not I messed up. Confused, like my marriage was an option he was comparing side by side. I stared at him, trying to force my brain to process. So, what does that mean? I asked finally. Are you saying you're done with us? Logan shook his head quickly. No, not necessarily. I love you, Mila. I do. But I can't stop thinking about her, and I need to figure out what these feelings mean. My hands were still around my coffee mug, but I couldn't feel the heat anymore. And what are you saying you want? I asked, voice steadier than I felt. A break. He hesitated, then nodded, like he'd rehearsed this part. Kind of. I need time. I was thinking maybe I could take a month, spend some time with Jade and see if there's something real. And if it doesn't work out, then we focus on us. There are sentences that end things. Not with shouting, not with slammed doors. Just one calm line that reveals your place in someone's heart. A month-long trial. A test drive. And I, his wife, was supposed to wait at the curb like the safe choice. I blinked, staring at him, feeling something in me go very still. You're serious, I said. Logan nodded, eyes pleading. I know it sounds crazy, but I don't want to throw away what we have without being sure. I don't want to live with regrets. Regrets. Like he was the one risking everything. Like my pain was collateral damage to his self-discovery. I sat there, staring at him, anger and disbelief rising like a tide. Part of me wanted to scream, to beg, to throw the mug at the wall and demand he remember who I was. But another part of me, the quieter, colder part, decided to stay calm, to let him hear the emptiness he'd created. All right, I said finally, leaning back in my chair. Logan blinked, caught off guard. Wait, really? Sure, I said, shrugging like it didn't matter, like my heart wasn't cracking clean down the center. If you think that's what you need, go ahead. His expression shifted, uncertain. I just think it's the best way to figure out where my heart is. Sure, I repeated. Inside, something flipped. Because the moment my husband asked permission to live with another woman for a month, I wasn't his wife anymore. I was his backup plan. And I don't know if Logan saw it in my eyes, how calm can be more dangerous than rage. But for the first time that morning, his confidence faltered. He reached across the table, fingertips brushing toward my hand, like that could soften the knife. Thank you, he whispered, like I'd granted him something noble. I know it's a lot to ask, but I really believe it's the right thing for us. I pulled my hand away and stood up, lifting my coffee mug. Do what you need to do, I said, voice flat. And as I walked out of the kitchen, the house behind me suddenly felt like a stage after the audience leaves. Quiet, echoing, waiting for the next scene to get ugly. Logan didn't say much after that. He just sat at the kitchen table like he was waiting for me to change my mind, waiting for the fight to start, for me to cry, for me to beg. Like that was the script he'd rehearsed in his head. But I didn't give him the scene. I went upstairs, took a shower, and let the water beat against my shoulders until my skin turned pink. I stood there longer than I needed to, staring at the tile, listening to the muffled sounds of him moving around the house. Drawers opening, closet doors sliding, the quiet shuffle of decisions being packed into fabric. When I came downstairs, he was folding shirts into a duffel bag on the couch, like he was preparing for a weekend trip, not a month-long trial run of our marriage. You don't have to leave today, I said, because the words came out automatically, like muscle memory. He looked up too fast. Hope flickered in his eyes. I corrected, voice calm. Do whatever works. I'm just saying, you're moving quick. Logan swallowed. I don't want to drag it out. Of course he didn't. Dragging it out would mean sitting with guilt. It would mean hearing the silence and realizing it wasn't peaceful, just empty. I talked to Jade, he added, like that detail was supposed to soften the blow. She said I could stay with her, just for the month. He waited again. I nodded once. Okay. His eyebrows pulled together, confused. You're really okay with this? No, Logan, I'm not okay. I'm watching you walk out of our life like it's a door you can reopen whenever you get bored. But I didn't say that. Instead, I gave him this truth he'd earned. I'm not going to stop you, I said. If you want to do this, do it. He stared at me like he didn't recognize me. And maybe he didn't. Maybe he'd built a version of me in his mind. Soft, accommodating, desperate to keep him. A woman who would cling to history like it was oxygen. But the real me was standing in front of him with a steady face and a heart that felt like it had just been placed in a freezer. Logan finished packing over the next couple of days. He wasn't dramatic about it. He didn't cry. He didn't even look guilty, just restless, like he was itching toward something shiny. That, more than anything, made me feel sick, because it wasn't an accident. This wasn't a stumble. It was a choice he'd been building toward every time he laughed too long in the driveway, every time he locked his phone, every time he said Jade's name with that new brightness. The day he left, the weather was absurdly nice. Sunlight spilled across the living room floor like nothing was wrong, like the universe was mocking me for believing in stability. Logan stood near the door with his duffel bag slung over his shoulder. He looked good, clean, put together, like he was heading to a new life instead of abandoning an old one. He cleared his throat. Mila. I waited. He stepped closer, like he wanted to hug me, then hesitated, like he was afraid affection would make him feel worse. This doesn't mean I don't love you, he said quickly. I just need clarity. Clarity. He said it like it was a reasonable request, like I was a fog he needed to walk through. I nodded once. Sure. His face tightened. You're really not going to say anything? I looked at him then, really looked. At the man I'd laughed with, planned with, built with. At the person I'd trusted with the most ordinary pieces of my life. Grocery lists, weekend plans, sleepy conversations in bed. And I realized something that made my stomach drop. He wanted me to explode because that would make him feel important. If I screamed, it meant he mattered. If I begged, it meant I couldn't live without him. If I fell apart, he could call this heartbreak. Proof. But if I stayed calm, if I let him go without spectacle, then his decision would look exactly like what it was. Selfish. So I gave him nothing. Drive safe, I said. Logan froze like I'd slapped him. Then he turned and walked out. The door clicked shut behind him, and the house didn't feel empty right away. It felt quieter, like someone had turned the volume down on my life. I stood there for a long time staring at the door, waiting for the emotional wave to hit. Rage, sobbing, panic. But what came first was calm. A strange, sterile calm. Like the part of me that had been bracing for impact for months finally got confirmation that, yes, the crash was real. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and drank it slowly. My husband was living next door with another woman. If it weren't my life, it would have sounded like a ridiculous TV plot. The first few days were the worst in the most subtle way. Not because I was crying constantly, because of the small things. His coffee mug on the counter. His charger cord still plugged into the outlet by the couch. A pair of sneakers by the front door that I hadn't noticed until they were suddenly offensive. I thought about moving his things into a box. Then I didn't. Not because I missed him. Because touching his stuff felt like touching a lie. Instead, I threw myself into work. I volunteered for extra projects. Stayed late. Took calls I didn't need to take. Fixed code that wasn't broken, just to keep my mind busy. At night, the house felt too large. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was loud in the way absence is loud. So I started going to the gym. I'd never been a gym person the way Jade was. I'd always exercised in practical ways. Walks, hikes, occasional runs when I was stressed. But now I needed something physical. Something that hurt in a way that didn't require words. I started lifting. Not because I wanted abs or a revenge body. Because it felt good to push weight away from my chest. To sweat until my thoughts blurred. To leave the gym exhausted enough to sleep without dreaming. Friends noticed something was off. At first, they asked lightly, "Where's Logan? Haven't seen him in a while. Is everything okay?" And I lied. He's staying with a friend for a bit. Work stuff. Just busy. I hated myself for it. Not because I owed them the truth, but because every lie made it feel like I was protecting him. Like I was keeping his reputation clean while mine quietly rotted in silence. There was only one person I told the truth to. My dad. I called him on the 4th day. He answered on the 2nd ring, and before I could even speak, he said, "What's wrong?" My throat tightened. "How did you know?" "I'm your father," he said simply. "Talk." So I did. I told him about Jade, about the jogging, the phone, the confession at the kitchen table, the month-long trial. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then my dad exhaled slowly. "Baby," he said, voice low, controlled. "That man has nerve." I laughed once, sharp and humorless. That's one way to put it. "Listen to me," he said. "You are not an option. You are not a placeholder. You are not the safe thing he can come back to when he's done playing." My eyes stung, but I blinked hard. He continued, gentler now. "If he doesn't know your worth, why should you wait around for him to figure it out?" That line stuck. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't poetic. It was just true. And once something like that gets into your bones, it doesn't leave. That night, I sat in the living room with the lights off. The wedding photo sat on the mantel like a polished lie. We looked so happy in it. So sure. I stared at the picture for a long time, waiting to feel nostalgia. Instead, I felt something colder. I started seeing the past through a sharper lens. All the little red flags I'd ignored because they weren't big enough. How Logan always needed attention. How he fed on it. How he got restless when life was calm. How he liked being desired more than he liked being devoted. I didn't cry. I just sat there in the dark and let my mind quietly rearrange the story of my marriage. By the end of the week, a decision had formed in me, with the stillness of a locked door. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for Logan to make a grand choice like I was a prize on a shelf. I was going to make my own. The next morning, I called a divorce lawyer. Sitting in that office felt surreal, like I'd stepped into someone else's life. The leather chairs were too shiny. The air smelled like paper and coffee and people who never raised their voices. The lawyer listened while I explained everything. She didn't react dramatically. She just nodded, took notes, and then said calmly, "You're well within your rights to file. This falls under irreconcilable differences." Irreconcilable. Hearing the word made something click, because that's what we were now. Not two people working through a rough patch. Two people living in different realities. I left her office with a stack of information and a strange sense of relief. Not happiness. Relief. Like I'd finally stopped trying to hold a collapsing wall upright with my bare hands. Back home, I started taking small steps. I moved money into a separate account. Not to be petty, but because I wasn't going to be blindsided twice. I looked around the house with new eyes, mentally dividing what was mine, what was his, what was ours on paper, but already dead in spirit. I didn't touch his stuff yet. Not because I was saving it for him. Because I wanted everything done clean, legal, undeniable. The days turned into weeks, and the neighborhood started whispering. Not to my face at first, just little comments that floated back to me like smoke. A neighbor mentioned in seeing Logan and Jade at the park together, looking cozy. Another said they'd spotted them at a cafe downtown, laughing like teenagers. I nodded politely when I heard it, smiled like it didn't matter. But inside, something twisted. Not jealousy, not heartbreak, humiliation. Because I could picture it so clearly. Logan living in Jade's house, acting like he was free, like our marriage was a sweater he could take off and put back on. By the third week, I stopped checking my phone for messages from him. There were a few texts, vague. "Hope you're okay, we'll talk when I'm back." No apology, no real conversation, just crumbs, like he assumed I'd stay hungry. One night, I was cleaning the garage when I found a box of old photos. Early days, first trips, stupid smiles. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness so sharp it made me inhale. But then I thought about the present, about the month, about the way he'd looked at me like I was supposed to thank him for choosing clarity. I closed the box and pushed it aside. I didn't need those memories to hold me hostage. And then, almost exactly 1 month from the day he left, I heard the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. I looked out the window. Logan's car. My heart didn't race. It didn't leap. It just settled, like a judge taking her seat. He was coming back. And he had no idea what he was walking into. Logan walked through the front door like he'd just come back from a business trip. Not tentative, not apologetic. Comfortable. His duffel bag hung off his shoulder, his hair perfectly styled, his jacket zipped halfway like he'd practiced this entrance in the mirror. He set the bag down by the door and smiled at me like we were resuming a paused conversation. "Hey," he said, "I'm back." I was sitting on the couch flipping through channels, the TV muted. I didn't look up right away. "Welcome back," I said, neutral. The words landed wrong. Too flat, too controlled. He hesitated, like he'd expected more. Tears, anger, relief, something that confirmed he still mattered. When I didn't give it to pain him, he walked closer and perched on the arm of the couch, careful, like he didn't want to spook me. "We should talk," he said softly. I picked up the remote and muted the TV fully, then turned to face him. "All right," I said, "talk." Logan took a breath, the kind people take before delivering a speech they've rehearsed a dozen times. "I've done a lot of thinking," he began, "about myself, about us, about what I want." I nodded once, waiting. "I care about you, Mila, I really do," he said. "And I think we can work through this. I think we can rebuild what we have." Rebuild. He said it like we'd chipped a plate, not shattered it. I stayed quiet. That made him uneasy. "Jade's a great person," he continued, and I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from reacting. "She's fun and exciting, but she's not what I need long term. She's immature. She doesn't have the stability you do." There it was. The comparison. The downgrade. He smiled like he was delivering good news. "I think I just got caught up in the excitement," he said. "You know, And once that faded, I realized what really matters. I let him talk. I let him fill the silence with his rationalizations, his careful phrasing, his attempt to frame the last month as a learning experience instead of betrayal. When he finally paused, watching my face for a reaction, I stood up without a word and walked to the kitchen. I opened a drawer, pulled out a neatly stacked set of papers, and walked back into the living room. I placed them on the coffee table between us. "What's this?" he asked, frowning. "Divorce papers," I said simply. The color drained from his face. He laughed once, short and nervous. "You're kidding." "No," I said, "I'm not." He stared at the papers, like they might rearrange themselves into something else if he looked long enough. You filed?" he asked. "Yes." His head snapped up. "While I was gone?" "Yes." "You're divorcing me?" His voice cracked, disbelief bleeding into anger. "I am." For a moment, he just sat there, frozen. Then his expression hardened. "Second choice?" he snapped suddenly, standing up. "That's not what this is. I was confused, Mila. I needed time." "And you decided the best way to get clarity," I said calmly, "was to move in with another woman." "That's not fair," he shot back. "I didn't leave to end our marriage. I left to make sure I wasn't making a mistake by staying." I looked at him then, really looked. "You don't test a marriage by leaving it," I said quietly. His jaw tightened. "You're throwing everything away over one mistake." I shook my head. "It wasn't one mistake. It was a series of choices. You chose to flirt. You chose secrecy. You chose to walk out that door. Those weren't accidents, Logan. They were decisions." He opened his mouth, then closed it again, searching for something that would land. "We have history," he said finally. "We have a house, plans. You don't just throw that away." "I didn't," I said. "You did, a month ago." Silence stretched between us. I could see the realization starting to form. Slow, ugly, undeniable. He wasn't the one deciding anymore. "I made a mistake," he said, softer now. "I admit that, but we can fix it." I crossed my arms. "I'm not interested in fixing something with someone who treats me like a backup plan." "That did it." His face twisted with anger. "You're being cold." "I'm being honest." "You're punishing me." "I'm choosing myself." He stared at me like I'd just spoken a foreign language. The conversation unraveled after that. He tried guilt, reminding me of trips, of laughter, of the way we used to be. He tried fear, mentioning how hard dating would be, how lonely life could get. He even tried pity, voice cracking, eyes glossy, like regret should buy forgiveness. None of it worked. Eventually, he grabbed his duffel bag again, hands shaking. "You're making a mistake," he said at the door. "No," I replied. "I'm correcting one." The door slammed behind him, and for the first time in a month, I slept without waking up in the middle of the night. Later that evening, my phone buzzed. "This isn't over." I stared at the message for a second, then locked my phone and set it face down on the table. He was right about one thing. It wasn't over. But it was no longer his story to control. Logan didn't give me much time to enjoy the quiet. The very next evening, just as I was rinsing a plate in the sink, someone started pounding on the front door like they were trying to knock it off its hinges. "Mila, open the door!" His voice carried through the house, sharp, frantic, familiar in a way that made my shoulders tense. I turned off the faucet, dried my hands slowly, and walked to the door. When I opened it, Logan pushed past me without waiting for permission, storming into the living room like he still owned the space. "We need to talk," he said, pacing back and forth. "You can't just file for divorce without giving me a chance to fix things." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You already had your chance." "That's not fair," he shot back, spinning toward me. "I didn't leave to end our marriage. I left to figure things out." "And in the process," I said calmly, "you figured out that you didn't mind losing me, as long as you had someone else to fall into." His jaw clenched. "That's not what happened." "Then explain it," I said. "Explain how moving in with another woman was supposed to strengthen our marriage." He opened his mouth, then shut it again. His pacing slowed. "I was confused," he said finally, voice cracking. "I didn't know what I wanted, but I know now. I want us." "Too late," I said. The words came out steady, but they landed hard. Logan stared at me like I'd just erased him. "You don't get to decide that alone." "I do," I said. "That's what happens when one person walks away. The other gets to choose what they accept." His frustration boiled over. "You're being petty," he snapped. "You're throwing away everything we built over one mistake." I shook my head. It wasn't one mistake. It was a pattern, and I finally stopped excusing it. He ran a hand through his hair, voice rising. "So that's it? 8 years, and you're done?" "Yes." The simplicity of it seemed to enrage him more than anything else. He tried another angle, softer this time. "What about our friends, our families? What are you going to tell people?" The truth, I said. That my husband left to live with someone else and expected to come back when it didn't work out. His face flushed. You don't have to humiliate me. I'm not humiliating you, I replied. Your choices did that. That's when he stopped pacing. For the first time since he'd come back, he looked small. What am I supposed to do now? He asked quietly. I felt a flicker of something, pity maybe, but it didn't last. That's not my responsibility anymore, I said. You made your choices. Now you live with them. He stood there for another minute, like he wanted to say something else, something that might undo everything. Then he walked out without another word. The fallout came fast. Logan started telling our mutual friends his version of the story, how I'd been cold, how I'd given up, how he'd only needed time and I'd punished him for it. I didn't argue publicly. I didn't defend myself in group chats or social media posts. I let the truth sit where it was. The people who mattered asked me directly, and when they did, I told them. My dad, on the other hand, didn't hold back. When I told him Logan had shown up yelling, he let out a low whistle. He really thought you'd fold. I think he thought I'd wait, I said, like I didn't have options. Well, my dad said, he's learning. The legal process moved forward quickly after that. My lawyer was efficient, precise, and unimpressed by Logan's attempts to stall. Every delay, every complaint, every emotional appeal only made the paperwork heavier. Logan tried to drag it out. Missed emails, rescheduled meetings, vague messages about needing more time. Time was the one thing I was done giving him. He even tried to argue that I owed him patience because he'd been honest about his feelings. Honesty doesn't erase consequences. As weeks passed, I could feel the power shift settling into place. Logan wasn't in control anymore. He wasn't choosing between two women. He was reacting to deadlines, to documents, to the realization that I wasn't coming back to the role he'd assigned me. And somewhere in that realization, the man who thought he could have it all started to understand something far more unsettling. Plan B had teeth, and she wasn't biting out of anger. She was biting because she was done. By the time the divorce reached the courtroom stage, the chaos had drained out of everything. What was left was quieter, sharper. Logan stopped yelling. He stopped showing up unannounced. He stopped texting threats that sounded more desperate than intimidating. Now everything went through lawyers. Emails with subject lines that felt absurdly calm. Calendar invites for meetings that would decide 8 years of shared life in 30-minute increments. That shift, away from emotion and into process, hit him harder than any argument ever could. Because process doesn't care how confused you were. It doesn't care how exciting someone else felt. It only cares about actions. And Logan's actions were documented. The month-long trial, the voluntary move-out, the financial records, the messages that showed intent, not confusion. When we finally sat across from each other in mediation, it was the first time I'd seen him in weeks. He looked worn. Not tragic, not broken. Just smaller, like the fantasy he'd chased had eaten more of him than he expected. He tried one last angle. Spousal support. His lawyer framed it carefully, how Logan had sacrificed career momentum, how he'd supported my growth, how the marriage had been a shared economic journey. I watched Logan's face while it was presented. He wouldn't meet my eyes. My lawyer didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She slid the documentation across the table. The timeline, the texts, the proof that he left voluntarily to pursue a relationship outside the marriage. The room went very still. The mediator cleared her throat. This will be difficult to argue, she said. Difficult was polite. Impossible was closer to the truth. The settlement ended up being clean. Not perfect, but fair. Logan received a modest payout and the furniture he'd insisted on choosing years ago. The couch, the dining table, the bookshelf he never actually read from. I kept the house. I kept the majority of my savings. More importantly, I kept my dignity intact on paper. When the final hearing arrived, the courtroom felt nothing like I'd imagined. No drama, no raised voices. Just fluorescent lights, hard benches, the sound of pages turning. Logan sat a few seats away from me, shoulders slumped, hands clasped too tightly in his lap. He looked like someone waiting for a verdict he already knew was coming. When the judge spoke, her voice was firm and uninterested in our feelings. Irreconcilable differences. The phrase echoed again. When it was time to sign, Logan hesitated. Just for a second. His lawyer slid the pen closer. Logan picked it up, stared at the paper, then signed his name like it physically hurt. And just like that, the marriage ended. No explosion. No cinematic ending. Just ink. Outside the courtroom, he caught up to me in the hallway. Mila, he said quietly. I turned. I'm sorry, he said, for everything. I searched his face, not for excuses, not for the man I married, but for accountability. I know, I said. Sorry didn't fix what he'd broken. He stepped closer, hesitating like he wanted to hug me. I stepped back. Take care of yourself, Logan, I said. Then I walked away. I didn't look back. Life doesn't snap back into place after a divorce. It settles, slowly, unevenly, in quiet ways no one warns you about. The house felt different once the paperwork was final. Not empty, just honest. There was no longer a question hanging in the air, no waiting for someone who might change their mind. Everything in it belonged to me now, even the silence. Every now and then, I'd hear things about Logan through the grapevine. Mutual friends, a neighbor who still didn't quite know which side to take. Jade had moved on, apparently quickly. She found someone else, someone new, someone shiny, the kind of person who didn't come with baggage or expectations. Logan, on the other hand, was still trying to figure out what his life looked like without a safety net. He'd moved in with a relative for a while, then into a small apartment closer to the city. People said he looked tired, quieter. I didn't feel satisfied hearing that. And I didn't feel sorry either. It just made sense. One afternoon, months later, I ran into him at the grocery store. I was in the produce aisle, comparing avocados, when I felt it. That awareness you get when someone familiar is nearby. I looked up. There he was. Our eyes met for half a second. I saw it immediately. The guilt, the regret, the understanding that he'd miscalculated something he couldn't redo. He gave me a small, awkward wave. I nodded once and kept walking. There was nothing left to say. That night, I sat on my back porch with a glass of wine, watching the sky darken over the neighborhood that had witnessed the quiet collapse of my marriage. I thought about how close I'd come to waiting, to staying still, to letting someone else decide my value. Logan had wanted a month of clarity. What he gave me instead was certainty. I learned something important through all of it. Love isn't proven by grand gestures or dramatic apologies. It's proven by consistency, by choosing the same person even when something shinier walks by, by understanding that commitment isn't a cage, it's a promise. Logan thought he could leave, explore, and come back, that I'd be grateful to be chosen again. But life doesn't work like that. People aren't placeholders, and I'm not a backup plan. I don't regret how I handled things. Not because it was easy, it wasn't, but because I didn't betray myself trying to save something that had already walked out the door. I rebuilt my life quietly, on my terms, and that ended up being the most satisfying ending of all.